Hello, I watched Weapons In Together, and I have about 6 hours to edit this video, so if this was posted on June 13th, then I succeeded. Woo! Weapons, the second feature film written and directed by Cregger after his debut with Barbarian, and starring Julia Gardner and Josh Brolin, is crazy. The biggest strength of Weapons is easily the hook. The premise is so simple and perfect that it's featured on the poster. Last night at 2:17 a.m., every child from Mrs. Gandy's class woke up, got out of bed, went downstairs, opened the front door, walked into the dark, and they never came back. Cregger perfectly builds on this one scene at a time, mostly highlighting Gardner's role as the distraught teacher who's found herself at the center of the 17 missing children from her class. Outside of being an excellent horror film, Weapons is also a very entertaining and well thought out mystery film. He also shows his strength in editing and storyboarding as we not only walk through what Mrs. Gandy is going through, but also seeing how it plays out from the viewpoints of several different people in town, most notably Josh Brolin. Not only are all the performances great, with a special exceptional performance from Amy Madigan, but Cregger flexes his skills as a horror director, taking the time and having the patience to properly build tension and suspense without relying heavily on cheap jump scares. They are in the film, but not without a handful of memorable scenes where Cregger simply waits and just lets the moment breathe, and truly keeps you on the edge of your seat because you're just waiting for that jump scare to release you and finally give you the opportunity to let out your breath. A technique that many lesser horror films are too afraid to practice, so they undermine scenes with jump scares that don't take the time to work towards their release. Also, given Cregger's background in comedy, the movie walks a really great balance with horror and comedy together, letting the absurd moments of a scene bring in a great levity that you'll rarely find being balanced so well in this genre. The comedy is chosen very carefully and never undermines the genuine horror and anxiety that Cregger masters. There's some scenes in the film that are so absurd and disturbing that you'll probably find yourself laughing at the sheer chaos that Cregger is relishing in. But I would never consider the film a full-blown horror comedy. To me, this is still very much a horror film, where I think something like The Monkey more closely embraces both sides equally. The film also touches on very interesting themes regarding trauma affecting adults and children differently, the meaning of how weapons are used in society, the different forms they can take, and how that too can affect adults and children. It's a movie that I think will be incredibly rewarding on a rewatch. The final act of the film really delivers on its premise and mystery and culminates in a finale that is as disturbing as it is utterly ridiculous and hilarious. I wish I could talk more without spoiling it, but all I can say is I thought I was watching something out of a cartoon by the end, and I mean that as the highest praise I can give. I really loved Weapons, and I highly recommend you check it out. Take all of your friends. I guarantee you'll walk away with a film that you're going to be thinking about for a while. And I also watched Together, written and directed by Michael Shanks and starring the married acting couple of Dave Franco and Alison Brie. Franco and Brie star as a couple going through some serious relationship turmoil as they move to start a new life and start experiencing some strange things that physically changes them and tests their relationship. Easily the biggest strength of Together is the disturbing cinematography. Shanks and cinematographer Jermaine McMicking produced some of the scariest and most haunting imagery I've seen in a while in a horror film. I can still picture some scenes playing in my head because of how absolutely terrifying they were. I've never seen a film that depicts sleep paralysis as horrifying as the way Together does. There's also an incredible use of makeup, costume, and especially sound design to reinforce that disturbing imagery in a way that reminds me of some of the incredible work found in something like The Substance. Together really excels at highlighting that scary feeling of something moving under your skin, against your will. The film's very much at its best when it leans into its absurd and borderline hilarious story, drawing most of its strengths from Franco and Brie, who naturally have perfect chemistry as a couple that feels as believable as any real pair, but they're both incredibly charming, and thankfully the movie is aware of just how well Franco and Brie can sell their lines and how great of comedic timing the two of them have when they're paired up. But Together can be just as horrifying as it is hilarious, and I think balances the two elements really well without letting either steal the spotlight for too long. I mean, Dave Franco has always been especially good at playing kind of pathetic or obnoxious characters, so it's nice to see Together really lean into his strengths and natural comedic charm. The movie only really starts disappointing when it gets too bogged down into the how and why of the premise, which never felt necessary. Any time spent away from our couple when they're on screen feels like it's dragging, and I think Shanks is a little too concerned about explaining some of the reasoning and setup behind the horror. Also, this might be a bit of a nitpick, but while the pre-title sequence of the film is incredibly creepy and does a great job of setting the tone, it also feels like it kind of spoils the movie, and sets you with a very clear expectation of what's going to happen in a way that I think overall hurts the story. The initial teaser trailer for Together is so perfect, leaning on the film's disturbing imagery and atmosphere and absurdity without revealing much of anything about the plot or mystery, so it feels very strange that the prologue more or less tells you too much about what's going to happen. I think it would have helped the film going into it knowing as little as our main characters, but whatever. It doesn't detract from the fact that Together is still really solid. It's horrifying and hilarious, but also weirdly sweet and romantic, and it'll either make you feel that much closer to your partner, or it'll make you want to avoid touching them for 24 hours. It's a great time for original horror films, so delete your Netflix account, run to the theater, and have a grand old time, because I think you'll like Weapons and Together.